Welcome, everyone, to this fantastic Going Global event. My name is Marcus Wootton. I'm a Programme Manager at the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. And I run the college's programmes in Myanmar and some work that we're building up in Nepal at the moment. That's me. And I have the very great honour of being able to introduce two fantastic co-presenters who are going to take us through this this workshop together. Helen, would you like to introduce yourself, or Emma? I don't mind you guys.
Hello everyone, my name is Helen Slattery and I'm a project manager within a Directorate of Health Education England called the Directorate of Global Health Partnerships. Oh, and I have previously run a health partnership myself in the north of Uganda in Gulu, so I have a lot of experience in managing volunteers.
Emma, you're on mute. Let's try.
Hello, I'm Emma. I've just knocked a glass of water over at my feet, so I'm a little distracted. I'm Emma. I'm a nurse from Manchester, and I went to Gulu in North Uganda volunteering in 2017, which I'm going to talk to you about in a little while.
Great, thanks. It's really great to have both of you here. This is a kind of merging of two sessions that we did previously, and so I just thought I'd go through the format, which we hope will get everything everything that you wanted to answered. We try and make this as interactive as possible. You can be the judges at the end as to whether we've succeeded in that aim or not, but at least that's the attempt. So what we're going to do initially is we came to the conclusion that you would all probably come into this Zoom call with questions, with things that you wanted answered. And so what we'd like you to do is to, in the chat, and you can write it to me or you can write it for, if you can find me on the thing actually, because then it's a bit more fun, because then our contributors don't necessarily get the opportunity to pre-read the questions. So what we'll do is, if you can find me on the chat and send me the question that you came into, or a couple of questions that you came in to this room with. So what were the things that you wanted to know about when you signed up to attend this? And then we're going to have two great presentations. I'm going to say a few very quick things about professional preparation. Then we'll go on to Helen, who's going to talk about her view around that, and then Emma. And then we'll come back, and at the end, then I'm going to fire the questions at our two willing participants who hopefully be able to answer them. And the reason that we want to do this is because it gives everybody the opportunity to ask as many questions that they want, and hopefully that gives us a sort of a framework that's fairly comprehensive in terms of people getting out of it what they want. So if you're able in the chat to write to me, so I'm Marcus somewhere down there. So if you're able to send it to me, send me a message with what questions you have. And then once we've done the presentations, we'll work our way through them. The more questions you provide us with, the more fun it tends to be. So over to you, folks. Right away, scribble away your questions while I get my my screen set up for my little 5 minutes, and then go from. I feel like we should play some incidental music at this point, but perhaps that's not such a good idea, is it? Brilliant, fantastic. We've got our first question in. I'm not going to say who it's from because this is all going to be completely anonymous, but that's great. Thank you for that. Somebody has managed the technology and can do this. That's great. So for those of you who just joined us, you're writing to me with the questions that you came into this Zoom room with. So what things did you want to have answered? The way this works is hopefully by the end of it, all of your questions get answered to a significant degree. So far, we've got one question, which is good, better than none. We'll end up with a few more. I'm going to give you about another minute or so, and then we'll crack on with the presentations. Great, got a second question. That's super. Those of you who are fans of awkward silences, this is your special day, I think, to be fair. Have we got any other questions? 2 so far. Okay, on the basis that you are all still tapping away your questions, I'm just going to quickly share my screen, and then we're going to go from there. And hopefully, during the course of my presentation, a few more will pop in to the box. There we go. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. Right then. So this is a sort of summary session, really. I love a graph. I love all types of graphs. Any graph is my thing. I particularly like this graph. This is definitely in my top 3 graphs. This is a rather famous graph that some of you will have seen before, from Dunning and Kruger, and it talks about the difficulties of recognizing one's own incompetence leading to self-inflated assessment. Essentially, that often people go into new ventures with an overwhelming sense of confidence that masks some of the deficiencies in their own knowledge. Now, I think there's a couple of things quite interesting about this graph. The first thing is, I think it's important to recognise that we all go into this as novices. The second thing is, I think this just proves the old maxim that the more I learn, the less I understand. And I think for all of us who've worked overseas in various different jobs, I think that is something that definitely, for me at least, rings true. And you never really ever get back to that initial burst of confidence that you have at the beginning. And that's okay. And it's okay to recognize that more than anything else. I think we need to be aware of the skills that we can bring, but also the deficits in our knowledge and the things that when we are preparing to go, we should ask to make sure that we are as well versed as possible. The other really important thing about this graph as well, which I quite like, is that the x-axis, as you'll see, there isn't really time on this, so you can rattle through this first bit of experience quite quickly as you move on towards experts. That's the first thing. Here we go. And this was kind of crystallized a couple of years ago. I don't know how many of you remember this rather fantastic Twitter spat between David Lammy MP and Stacey Dooley, and the public were invited to decide whether they were on Team Lammy or Team Dooley. But I think it highlighted a much wider discussion really around white saviours and around people going to work in low resource settings, not always necessarily for completely altruistic reasons. And I think it's important to recognise that as well, and also to recognise how we as very comparatively affluent health workers are seen within these contexts, and whether our interactions are always helpful or not. Another graph, because love graphs. The other thing I think that we should also bear in mind, and one of the things I think that should govern a lot of what we do, is thinking about what is the long-term impact of my intervention. And so one of the things I think it's really sometimes quite useful to talk about is how quickly after an event, whether that's a learning event, whether you're going to do teaching, do people forget what you've told them? And this is work from Herman Ebbinghaus, which is from the 1890s. And yet it's one of those things that still doesn't seem to necessarily permeate all interventions and work overseas. And that is really that things like, for example, teaching short courses without the ability to change or influence the structure of care often doesn't lead to long-term improvement. And we know this from our own practice. We know that, I mean, if you go to a study day, how much really of what you learn on a study day is retained for more than a week? Well, Ebbinghaus thought it was 25%, assuming that you retained 100% of it at the beginning. And so really, I suppose the other thing I would say is when you're thinking about preparing to go overseas, one of the things that you might want to think about is how do I make the intervention that I'm going to do or the work that I'm going to do sustainable? I think all of us on the panel have seen examples where people have built systems that have pivoted around themselves. And that unfortunately leads you towards quite tricky conversations when you leave, because of course, if the system is pivoted around you and you leave, the risk is that all of that stuff comes undone and falls over. And I think we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of what the evidence shows, which is that there needs to be a continuum of support in many places. Otherwise, things just tend to fall over. And that kind of model of little projects, when you pick them up and put them down again, really doesn't lead to long-term change. So really, this is about a kind of a tension between altruism and altruism, which is a word I've made up. So for me, it's really important to make sure you've clearly identified what you can bring professionally, and in some ways to think about your length of UK length of experience and the quality of your experience as well. That doesn't mean that you have to have worked for years and years and years, but it does mean that you need to think about the ways in which you are able to support the place where you're going. The other thing I'd say that's also really important is thinking not only about the clinical skills. A lot of people focus on the clinical skills and the hands-on stuff, but also thinking about things that you can bring in terms of, for example, HR management, in terms of workforce, in terms of how to do a rota that's effective, in terms of quality and how you ensure quality within your own workplace. These are really important things and really valuable things to bring to a low resource setting if they're done in an effective and the right way. And we're going to hear examples of how that's done previously. Really important to learn from mistakes. Everybody screws stuff up. I've screwed loads of things up. Everybody screws things up. It's really important that we're honest about it and we learn from it. One of the questions that somebody asked me when I was interviewing them was, what in your program, what are the things that you wish you hadn't done? I think that's a fantastic question. And I think we should all be asking ourselves about that, really. And also when you're professionally preparing, one of the things to think about as well is who you're going to go with and why. What is the organisation you're going to choose to go with? You are a valuable commodity, or probably more valuable than you think you are in many ways. You are experienced with lots and lots of good understanding of how the UK health system works. That is an incredibly valuable asset. So interviews are two-way processes, and sometimes the organisations that you're working with may not be able to answer your questions satisfactorily. And actually, that's something I think when I'm advising people to professionally prepare, remember that you are valuable too. You don't have to go with the first person that offers you a job, and sometimes actually that's a good thing to not go with them. So when you find out, or where do you find out about how to work for? And I think, just like any job, this involves a lot of research. And as I said, interviews can work both ways. So what's the ethos of the organisation that you're working with? What can they show you about the impact that they've had? How are they going to support you before, during, and crucially after deployment? I think historically, international development has been quite bad at looking after people when they return from overseas work. And I think establishing networks of people who will support you before you go is actually a really, really important element of work, and certainly the organisation you deploy may be able to help you with that, as well as organisations like FET who will be able to put you, of course, in touch with people who have done similar programmes and projects in the past. So thanks very much for all that. I'm very interested to see what's coming up in the chat in terms of your questions, and we'll ask those in a moment, but just, it's great pleasure to hand over to Helen. Helen, would you like to go first, or is it Emma? I've forgotten the running order. That's a terrible start, isn't it?
Shall I see if I can
I'll stop
my
sharing.
screen?
There
we go.
We've only had 2 questions. God, come on, people. It's going to be a very, very short question session if we carry on like that.
So, okay, if it's over to me.
It is.
I'm looking at personal preparation. So some of this will be really obvious to you. Some of it will be what you've already thought about, but maybe there'll be some other useful tips that I mentioned that you haven't come across yet. So we'll just whiz through some of these slides. Trying to work out how to move it on. So some of you who've attended one of the FET sessions earlier, we talked about this, about the outcomes of international volunteering for NHS staff. And this is from a piece of research published by Tyler in 2018. And what they were trying to find out was what metrics were there for measuring volunteers' experience, and having reviewed literature and undertaken volunteers' interviews, they came up with a set of outcomes, and these were divided up into particular domains. And from there you can see 4 around knowledge, skills and attitudes. And they found that, you know, from a knowledge point of view, it was looking at maybe diseases that rarely encountered conditions in the NHS, the skills, management and leadership, for example, and attitudes around cultural and emotional intelligence. And for the organisation, that they went back, sort of increased productivity because they felt more motivated, for example. And also as the employer, they were seen in a sort of very positive light for being able to offer these types of opportunities. So we recognise that there are benefits to this type of volunteering work. I found this very interesting. This was in a volunteer guide in one of the hospitals I've worked with in Uganda. And I think what it says here is, you know, come, but don't bring your own views without kind of consulting us, and you know, talk to us, and don't just sort of wade in. Let's have conversations, and let's look at mutually beneficial goals. And I think it echoes really what Marcus was saying, that don't impose your own perhaps NHS views on a system that's quite different from an NHS, and have dialogue both ways. So a lot of these will be very familiar to you. You'll have thought of them already. And there are many checklists. If you go on, do a Google search of checklists, and you can check against it. You've got your sunscreen packed and your, you know, your malaria net, for example. But sometimes I find, having managed volunteers, that they don't always think about these things. So maybe write a list. You know, so personally, how is your family going to manage if you're not there for an extended period of time? And think about life events. You know, is there an important birthday coming up that you really need to be back home for? Somebody once approached me about a 3-month volunteering opportunity, but then remembered that they were getting married, and that probably this wasn't really a good thing to be doing, to go away. So even when it seems really obvious, you know, do think about these things. Also think about what point in your career is a good time to go. There'll be certain points that are better than others. And also, and Mark has brought this up, I think, to think about, have you got the right skills and experience to go? You know, what are you going to be able to offer? You know, you don't want to be more burdensome on the partner organisation you're going with because of a lack of experience and knowledge, for example. That's not to say that if you're inexperienced, there isn't much you can learn, but just sort of bear this in mind. And it probably goes hand in hand with what Marcus was saying about do your research about who you go with and see what support is available to you. You might consider your education and training. There are many courses that you might want to take in preparation. I think Emma might touch on those a little bit more. You know, have you got the right skills? And you know, have to think about that. One important point is self-awareness, and it is a bit difficult, that, because sometimes we don't always know about ourselves. We perhaps just listen, maybe listen more to other people. You know, how do you deal with situations that are difficult? Do a bit of self-examination. You know, how do you manage conflict? What do you find stressful? Because The situations that you may find yourself in, if you're doing overseas volunteering, will challenge you, and thinking about how you manage that and deal with that beforehand it can be useful in helping you have a better experience. I'm just going to move on to finances next, even though that's not really the order. This is an important thing for volunteers. How are you going to fund this? And what effect might it have on your finances if you're to have a career break? So could there be effects on your pensions and national insurance? And I don't profess to be an expert on this, by the way, but just make sure that you check out on the NHS Pensions website, get some really good advice, and work out what might work best for you so that you don't have surprises in the future. You might think about your mortgage and how you're going to manage mortgage payments. I remember a volunteer who wanted to come for a year's experience, and they rented out their house, and that enabled their mortgage payments to be made and possibly helped fund a little bit of their volunteering experience. You can, of course, do fundraising. You may go with an organisation who pay, that's entirely possible, or maybe that you apply to write a case. And as Marcus was saying, those points are really important about sustainability. It's no longer okay to say, well, I'm going to go over there and do something useful. You need to explain what the impact might be, and when you leave, what will happen. So those are important things to think about if you're writing an application. So moving back onto health, well, I think the COVID pandemic has taught us a lot about health and movement, and things that you might need to do to look after the health of yourself and others. And additionally, in terms of travel, just make sure that you're always staying in touch with, say, for example, the UK government website on travel advice, really, really useful, updated quite regularly. And you do need to know that the country that you're traveling in, you've made the right preparations to get there. Physical health, other things that have come up with volunteers in the past. And a particular thing is storage of medicines. So if you need a medicine that needs to be stored in a particular way, so for example, a fridge, think about, is the place that you're going to be able to offer that opportunity, or do you need to explore what you need to do? Make sure you can get enough medication, do the health checks beforehand, go to a travel clinic, get the vaccinations, make sure you have enough. And buy things abroad. Sometimes they're cheaper, but sometimes I have heard that there may be fake medicines. So what you think you might be buying may not be what you're buying. So just take care, take local advice. I'm going to move on to something that's actually really important. Quite often people are familiar with looking after their physical health for all the reasons I've given you. You can go to a travel clinic quite easily, but how much attention have you paid to your mental health and managing your mental health and well-being? So I have some tips for you that I'm going to share. And these are courtesy of a wonderful group of people I've had the opportunity to work with. They have a health partnership in Gulu, in north of Uganda, and it's the Sheffield Health and Social Care Trust. So the types of things they explain is to plan equally for your mental health. And even if you don't have an existing condition that you may not know about, doing an overseas opportunity, often we have to respond emotionally to something that might be quite challenging morally and ethically. So you need to be prepared. Gather as much information as you can over time and allow time for processing. And that's why speaking to people who've perhaps done that experience before, you read blogs or the person in charge of the opportunity that you're undertaking will be really useful. Think about debriefing, and it was something interesting Marcus said as well. It's something we're not often, or organisations aren't very good at doing. So think about who it might be that you talk to when you come back, so that you've got time to explore those and not let your concerns build up. So ideally, plan a debrief before you get back. Think about whether there's any groups that you can join, whether virtually or in person. And again, blogs and people who are arranging these trips for you can help you with that, so that you've already got a network in place before you arrive. Know where your Wi-Fi is and make sure that you've got good battery power so that you never feel cut off. And other useful things you can do is to write a journal, write things down. It's just a helpful way to understand maybe a roller coaster of emotions that you may be going through. So a way of organising this is something called a Wellness Recovery Action Plan. It's called a WRAP, and you can Google that. And it's just a framework really to help you work out how you might, for example, describe yourself when you're well. And so you might use words like, oh, talkative, calm, caring, peaceful. And think of examples that help you stay in that way of being well, whether my personal favourite, chocolate, but otherwise it's listening to music, talking to friends, it might be exercise, it could be reading, it might just be having a really nice coffee. And it's not rocket science, it's just totally personal to you. And the reason that's important that you write this down is so that you're able to share it with other people, so that if they notice a change in you, that you're doing things differently, you may not be aware of it. And it may be that normally, you go out, you do your exercise, and actually you're not doing that anymore. And instead of going out, you're hiding in your room, or you're overeating or undereating. So other people can help recognize that, or it might be something that you see in yourself. So think about what helps you get you through the day, and understand really any triggers that might make you feel unhappy. Maybe anniversaries, for example, could be places. Think about what your reaction is to them and what you can do. Think about early warning signs, and as I said, you can let other people know what they may be, whether it is that sleeping too much or not enough. And if things aren't really working, just see if there's anything else that might be able to help you. And make a list of what you can do and what has worked for you in the past, and let other people know what they might be able to help, how they might be able to help you. Think about how you are when you're very well and what helps and hinders you. So the main points: allow time for self-care. Think about if you are somewhere that's lonely or isolated, how you would feel and what you can do about that in advance. If you have any medication you need, think about how you would get hold of some. If it was lost, what you could do if you needed to get any more. Keep your WRAP to hand, share it with people that you trust. Have your phone charger handy, and think about a communication system before you leave. And very finally, last thing from me, is think about recording your experiences. So the Health Education England toolkit is very useful. It helps you write down your experiences, but also provides really good evidence for any continuing professional development, accreditation, for example, that you might need when you get back. It's very easy to return home and you've forgotten all those things you've learned, and you've forgotten your experiences. And this is one way to make sure that you remember them. Okay, now I think it's time to hear from Emma.
Hi, I think Charlotte's going to share my slides. Okay, and I'm going to do a Chris Whitty. So next slide, please. Okay, so I've already said my name's Emma. I'm a ward manager in South Manchester, and in 2017 I went to Gulu in North Uganda for 4 months. I went back for 3 months a bit later, and I also went to Bangladesh. So basically I took a 15-month career break, and this was how I prepared to go. So first of all, I had to make a decision about wanting to go, and I've said that my lead time was 17 months plus 20 years, and that is no lie. So I'd sort of harboured a desire to go and volunteer abroad for about 20 years, and just as Helen touched on, you know, things get in the way career-wise and mortgage-wise and family-wise, and it was never the right time. And then in 2016, I went on the tropical nursing diploma in Liverpool, and I did 3 weeks there full time, and it was absolutely amazing. I'll touch on that now. And I came back with a decision that I was pretty much going to hand my notice in to go on a career break. So the tropical nursing diploma, it was 3 weeks full time. You learnt about tropical diseases, how to nurse people with different diseases. You also did all the sociology around humanitarian responses and how the cluster system works for the UN. And also in the third week, we made poo slides with looking at parasites and things. And I think every nurse doesn't mind a bit of poo. So it was quite interesting, really. And then I was just fired up to go. So I came back and discussed it with my boss. And I think professionally, when you're the ward manager, there's only one sister on the ward. So it gave her time to think about how I was going to be replaced at work for the time that I was off. And it gave her much less chance to sort of say no, really. So that was a good idea. Next slide, please. So this has already been touched on by Marcus, but I had to choose who I was going to go with. So professionally speaking, there was, I mean, a myriad of organisations from like MSF and BSO. And as you've probably guessed, I went to Gulu, which is what Helen was talking about. So it was an organisation that I knew from work that was allied to work called the Gulu Man Link. And Helen got wind of my plans to go abroad, and we had a very long and deep chat about going with the Gulu Man Link. So I chose that organisation because I knew how well organised it was. It was very well established. It was completely transparent. There was all the information I could possibly need. I was hooked up with volunteers past and able to quiz them personally on how they found it. And very importantly, I realised that the Gulu Man Link had very comprehensive risk assessments and liability insurance. And it was really fundamental to working well. When I went to Bangladesh, I was quite naive. I paid to go for 2 weeks to a refugee clinic with an American organisation. And having been with the Gulu Man Link, I had some questions to start asking, but quite late in the process about their risk assessments and et cetera, et cetera. And I think it became apparent to me that they weren't very well organised, and they weren't very deep in their sort of risk assessments and things. So that was a different experience. It pays to do your homework. Next slide. This is sort of more personal, but I'll just touch on it, but Helen's already touched on it. You have to get your vaccinations. And I think having a really long lead-in time made me get all my jabs. A lot of them take quite a few weeks in between each jab, and they're very expensive. So it's good to sort of really be ahead of the curve. And just a little note that actually some things that you get charged for in travel clinics are actually free on the NHS. So of course, as health workers, we have our Hep B and things like that, but cholera and typhoid are public health risks to everybody. So they don't want you to bring that back to the UK. So the NHS will give you that for free. So top tip. Slide, please. There's a lot of red tape, and I think professionally speaking, when you go with a good organisation, they're going to really help you with that red tape. So there was lots of visas and applications for this, that and the other, and I had to register with the Ugandan Nursing Council, and that is quite in-depth. So there was an international police check, not a DBS, it's more in-depth than that. You have to pay some money to get it. And the Ugandan Nursing Council wanted my transcript from when I qualified, which was 25 years before. So I had to apply to University of Manchester for my course transcript, you know, so it takes quite a bit of time. So that was all aided and abetted by the organisation. Next slide, please. You can skip these. Thank you, Charlotte. So I travelled up to North Uganda to Gulu. This was some of my journey. I'd never been to Africa before, so it was quite an eye-opener. Next slide, please. I think my image of Africa was unfortunately from the Ethiopian drought in the Band-Aid era, so I wasn't expecting the Nile. When we drove over the Nile and it was very verdant and green and lush, I was quite surprised and delighted. Next slide, please. And people selling things on the buses, it's just was quite different. So just to touch on some of the packing dilemmas which were more professional, the top left is uniform and work life. So as a ward manager, I was going to work on a ward, and I knew that from Helen and the organisation that the Ugandan nurses were really smart. I mean, some of them lived in mud huts, but they arrived in crisp white ironed uniforms. And I thought, do I want to present myself in scrubs, or do I want to be smart? So I decided I actually wanted to be smart. So I took uniforms with me. However, they weren't too hot actually. And I took decent shoes because I didn't want to get sharps on my feet. And I took my own PPE, a lot of my own PPE. I had a lot of gloves and took an FFP3 mask, which it was pre-COVID, but I knew that I would encounter TB. And I took alcohol gel and my own stethoscope. So slide, please. So North Uganda, Gulu is a town that experienced a civil war, which is extremely unpleasant and bloody. And it's now in a developing state. And this was just some next slides are sort of where I lived. So you can see that there was mud huts and buildings, and there was people coming and building roads. These two slides are actually, just go back one please, Charlotte. These two slides are the same road in exactly the same position. So the top slide is when I arrived in October 2017, and the bottom slide is November 2018. So as you can see, things are developing very rapidly in Gulu. Next slide. So I went to work in Gulu Regional Referral Hospital, and this is the hospital. There's the ward. It was a Nightingale ward. And like Marcus and Helen were both saying, you know, you need to have a remit when you go. And the Gulu Manlink had been there for many years, developing links. So I was there to help build some of the previous projects and that capacity element. So they'd been working on safe medication administration and baseline observations. But as a ward manager, I wanted to go and buddy the ward manager there and bring perhaps, I think it was Marcus that said it, some of the sort of different skills, perhaps the leadership and HR things and ward manager skills. You have to be flexible. As it turned out, the ward manager didn't really want to buddy me at all. I think it's just not a familiar scenario in Ugandan nursing, but I think also it was probably a little bit personal. She was a bit reticent. I went back the second time and I met another ward manager who was like really outgoing, and we clicked straight away. We shared lots of ward manager tales. We had very similar experiences with staff. She had lots of things she wanted to implement, and was very keen to sort of share ideas of how she could do those things, and we got on in a very different way. Next slide, please. I love bedside teaching. I do any opportunities. So as well as the things I was definitely hoping to do while I was there and build on, I also, there was about 40 nursing students on any shift, and it was really hard to know what to do with them, but I don't mind a bit of cleaning. So we got stuck into the cleaning, and we would just do asthma teaching sessions while we were cleaning the beds. Next slide, please. We also like scrub the walls, but we were learning all the time. Somebody appeared with a chest drain one day, and I did some teaching on that. We had another patient in who was severely septic, and we cannulated her and gave her loads of fluids. And the next day I brought some stuff in on the sepsis 6, and we did some ABCDE teaching and sepsis teaching because it was relevant and pertinent, and it was good fun. Next slide, please. This is one of the nurses making up IVs in the just the office. Next slide, please. And this is outside the ward where people come and sit and give their relatives food and drink and blankets and water and things. And I think that touches on dilemmas. I think Helen touched on that. And like the previous slide, they do things differently. they don't always do things to protocol, a bit like the UK. People don't always do what they are taught to do, and you have dilemmas around that, and you have to work out how you're going to deal with it. And also, like, if there's no relatives, like here there's a lot of relatives, but if there's no one for that patient, they have no food, no water, no bedding. That's another dilemma. You have nurses that will be asleep in the office and somebody's died on the ward overnight, or they steal the drugs, or there's different things. And I think having an organisation like the Gulu Manlink, like Helen touched on, I was able to discuss it with Helen. I was able to WhatsApp home and get some advice on how I was feeling or how I was going to cope professionally with certain situations. And I did, have to face up to, especially the stealing of the drugs, decide what I was going to do about situations like that. Next slide, please. So as you can see, Gulu was developing, and I went a couple of times. So I was able to make friends because I went sort of twice and met up with people again and cemented relationships. And there was yoga and pub quizzes. Next slide, please. There was also safaris because it was Africa. So I was able to go and enjoy some of my downtime. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emma. That's great. We've got a bit of time left, which is great. So I'm now going to wander through the questions that we've been sent. Somebody's been very helpful and has submitted 3 questions, which is great. And quite a few of you have done none at all, but that's fine. So the first one is, hello, Marcus. It's a good start. I'm due to retire in November and I'm keen to do some volunteering, and I'd like to know how I go about it, please. I'm a general nurse and a health visitor. Emma, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think a perfect time to go. I'm going to retire in a few years, and I'm definitely looking to do more work overseas. I think you'll have to keep your registration up and go with an organisation that expects that. Just take on the advice that we were all talking about. I think choose an organisation. You've got plenty of time when you're retired, so you can afford to go for a little bit longer, and really go somewhere where they're doing some wonderful projects, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, really interrogating the organisations is no bad thing. You have a lot of skills to offer, and I think it's really important to pick the organisation properly. Helen, any additional thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think find out what interests you, where are your strengths, what you might be able to offer, and see what another organisation, whoever you go with, how would they use you? Would you be doing a project? And know what it is you're going to do. Do you have the right skills to do it? Interrogation, homework, I think.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Helen. That's great. Steve, you've got a hand up. Is it in relation to this?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
My experience in Africa has spanned retirement. So I retired 4 years ago, but I was in Africa when time allowed prior to that. The one thing that I would say is you don't need a license to practice to work in Africa, but you do need to be registered with a GMC. So you will need to keep your registration, although your revalidation may be allowed to lapse. But again, you should look at the situation with regard to your indemnity.
Yes, I think indemnities are really, it's an important part of it, isn't it? So yeah, no, I would agree with all that. Thanks for that, Steve. The next one, how have you matched up your volunteering hat with your day job? Who wants to say that one? Emma, do you want to, Emma or Helen? Who do you fancy that one?
Well, I gave up my day job to go and volunteer, so it's hard to say really, because I took a deliberate career break to do it. So I mean, I could have handed my notice in. I chose to retain my employment, but that was just to be savvy and think about my pension. Actually, just touching on pensions, my organisation would have paid my pension they would have matched my contributions to the pension had I paid my contributions myself for 6 months. I couldn't afford to do that, actually, as it turned out, before I left, but that was the advice that I got, so that's really good to know, by the way.
So I've now had a second follow-up question to that, which is around how to match the day job in terms of those who are volunteering without travel. So that's virtual volunteering. Helen, do you have any experience of that?
Yes, we're doing a session on virtual volunteering next week, actually. So if you can join us next Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we can talk to you about virtual volunteering. I'm sorry, Marcus, I kind of missed the whole question.
No, the question was, talk to me about virtual volunteering, essentially.
Come next week. We've got a whole hour on it. Yes, in a word, I think because of COVID, it's accelerated those kind of opportunities. So I actually think there are more around. But again, go through organisations, they may be able to offer things that previously weren't available. But yeah, next week we can talk for an hour. Come and join us then.
Fantastic. Another question that's come here. One of the areas I'm particularly interested in is care reform in terms of disability adults and children and finding alternatives to institutions. I think that support volunteers who are still employed by the NHS, but it wasn't possible to volunteer earlier. Am I too late now with THET anyway, or are you able to share any ideas for charities I should approach? I might go to Charlotte. I don't know if you're on this panel or not, really. I don't know if you're there, but in terms of THET and this sort of interaction with systems, you better introduce yourself as well, Charlotte. So I just dragged you onto this panel, which I now feel slightly bad about. Carry on. Anyway.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the head of external engagement at THET. So thank you for the question. It's a great one. It's difficult, I'm not going to lie, at this time. The landscape in terms of funding and in terms of opportunities, particularly with THET and others, are limited, but that's not to say they're not there and they're not coming through. Something I might plug is our platform, which is called Pulse. I've just put the link in the chat box for everyone, and I think hopefully this is trying to aim to kind of be the go-to platform really for this community and others who are looking for opportunities. So it's a space for organisations and individuals to go on to post anything that they're looking for or people that they are looking for to fill the positions they have. So everybody from royal colleges to NGOs to government schemes, THET and beyond will hopefully be on there. And it's a good space to kind of flag what you're looking for and see who might be putting together projects. It also seems to be kind of a matchmaking service for health partnerships in the best sense possible. We haven't found love on there yet, but you never know. But in terms of volunteering opportunities and funding applications, there seem to be a lot of links being made. So if there's a particular interest of yours, as you mentioned, I think Pulse might be the place to go. Otherwise, HEE have always got different placement opportunities through the Improving Global Health Fellowships programme and others. And virtual volunteering is a great way to kind of start up your own partnership as well. So THET and HEE are both offering bursaries for virtual volunteering as an individual. So if it's something you're interested in and you want to find a partner overseas, that might be a great way to establish a link that then might become something more, as Emma's talked about with the Gulu Man link, or Marcus's with RCPCH and other overseas institutions. So yeah, lots of ways to do it, but I think Pulse and HE, THET, Royal Colleges, they're the kind of good ways to go at the moment in terms of where funding is sitting.
I'm a convert to Pulse. I wasn't entirely sure at the beginning, but now I'm completely won over by it. I think it's great. So any interaction with Pulse, I did like the description of it as a matchmaking service. I mean, you can decide which particular one you think it's most like.
It's the beating heart of the health partnership.
It is the beating heart of the health. That's it. That's it. There we go. So I think we're there in terms of questions, which is great, and we've got only a couple of minutes left, so that's fantastic. Any other final thoughts, guys, before we wrap this up? Helen, go.
I've got a quick one, and it's just to mention to people about medical equipment donation.
Oh yes.
And I can't go into it in a really big way because of time, but VET have got a really wonderful guidance document on their website that talks to you about that, because I know a lot of volunteers want to, with absolutely the right intentions, thinking that there's something that we have over here that maybe an overseas partner could use. But really, it's not always the case. There are many things to think about whether training is required, whether if it's a piece of equipment, what happens if it breaks down, and Charlotte's just put a lovely link on there for you all. So please read that before you start thinking about just saying, oh, we have some stuff we don't need, and I'm sure it'll be useful somewhere else in the world, even though I appreciate the intentions are good ones. And that has an international health partners organisation that they also work with. And there's, if you just do www. I think on their name, International Health Partners, they also provide guidance about medical donations. So if that's how you're thinking, please do your homework, and that will give you the right guidance. And again, another nice link there. So just wanted to add that. One final thing before I really do shut up. When we were talking about how do you manage your volunteering and what do you do, Emma talked about a career break, and other volunteers have tended to, some have done that, some have left their job, being optimistic, and in this day and age, if it was all right, that they would get another job when they came back. Some accrued a lot of annual leave, some accrued study leave, and some overworked hours where they were allowed to. So again, accumulated a lot of time mowing, and combined all of those to enable them to have time off. So if you're quite inventive, there are a few things you can do depending on the amount of time you have to be away.
Yeah, I think that's right. Thanks very much, Emma, Helen, and our newest attendee, Charlotte. Thank you for leaping on to join this panel. That was really helpful. It's been a really nice hour, so thanks very much indeed, everyone. That's been great. If you need any of us, we're all fairly Googleable, so do please get in touch, or Charlotte can give you our contact details, and best of luck. I'm sure the post-COVID development world will be a slightly different place, but nonetheless an enjoyable one. And it's been really nice to have you all on our little Zoom call. So thanks very much indeed, everyone, and stay safe. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks so much. And yes, next week is the virtual volunteering session at 3 o'clock. So do join Helen, Fleur, and many others next week. And hopefully I'll see lots of you at the conference tomorrow morning. Thanks again, Marcus, Emma, and Helen. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.